Welcome, everyone. Episode 21 of the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast. Your host, Steve Giordano. And, man, the most consistent team in football is the Miami Dolphins for all the wrong reasons. Everything I predicted last week came true, unfortunately, as the Dolphins fall to the Texans 20-12 in Houston, basically not eliminating them from the playoffs, which we'll talk about the scenarios for them to make it, which is impossible, but just about puts the nail in the coffin on the 2024 season. So as we prepare for the San Francisco 49ers who come to Hard Rock Stadium, last home game of the year, looking back on the Texan game, there's just so many things that are just the consistent theme as to why this team cannot win in big spots on the road against, better opponents. I mean, when I talk about the consistency and saying they're the most consistent, you are what you are, first of all, at this point of the season. And frankly, if you broke down this whole season, even if you look at the time without Tua, it was a little different in spots, but at the end of the day, the things I continue to bang the drum on continue to bite this team in the ass. Number one, special teams, long returns, poor tackling. The only thing you can say in the last couple months is Jason Sanders has been, pretty much automatic outside of missing an extra point in the Jet game. But the special teams tackling, the positioning that they're giving offenses the ball is just so piss poor just to start out. And I get it. Football's not about, people aren't always watching it for special teams, but special teams makes a difference. If you give the team the ball on the 40 or the 45, it's that much closer to them scoring. You put your defense in a bad position. They did it again last week. And, last week you get the defense plays very well. They have 4 sacks. Chop Robinson comes on, getting his 5th sack. Zach Sealer. Literally, Zach Sealer, you want to talk about the only guy on this team who actually plays well in big games? You can go back and look at some of these games that they've had in the last 3 years. He's the only one who shows up. He constantly has sacks in big games. He's constantly plugging the run in big games. He's a big game player. He's your most underpaid player by a mile. You basically overpaid the bulk of this roster and then underpaid him, and you got a bargain on him because he should be making not what Christian Wilkins would have been making here or what he is making in Oakland or in Vegas, but he's underpaid for what he gives you. Don't tell him I said that because our salary cap's already bad enough. But the defense came to play. From a defensive line perspective and from a linebacker perspective, they did enough. The secondary is really what bit you. Jalen Ramsey got burnt very poorly in the red zone on a play where he basically lets a receiver go by him, and Poyer's supposed to pick him up, and Poyer does nothing. And Poyer should just please retire because he's just god-awfully terrible. And the secondary of this team is like middling at best. I mean, Ramsey, look, he's a great player, but, the cornerback dynamic in the league in general, where it's a passing league, you're not going to stop everybody. He's obviously older. You obviously just paid him. He's still a very good player, and he's a very good tackler. But you can already see it's kind of, it's going to kind of probably creep up on him fast. Hopefully, it's a ways away. But you can see with Jordan Poyer. The guy is just not anywhere near what you need from a safety position, old and slow, as is a lot of this roster, which is a lot of the reasons that they have issues is because of the old and slow dynamic and just not enough young studs that have been developed and drafted well to fill in the roster in this now 6-year rebuild. There's just too many missed draft picks. And it's really going to bite them as they move forward into next year, which we're going to talk about. And then we get to the offense of this team. And, you want Tua to have the breakout moment. He has very good numbers. He's played lights out since he's come back from concussion after playing, fairly poorly in the first 2 games and then obviously getting hurt in the second game. He played lights out until last week. 3 interceptions, 2 really bad ones, one right before the end of the half, another one driving, and then another one, late in the fourth. And it's you can't say anything else, whether you're a Tua lover or a hater. And I'm a Tua supporter. I think he obviously can make plays. He's by far the most talented quarterback the Dolphins have had since Dan Marino. And that's, again, not saying much because it's been pretty lackluster. But the guy can play in the right scenario. But again, what happens to this season, right? The run game is beyond non-existent. It's gone. And what does that always bring us back to? The thing that will always rear its ugly head in this organization, and it's a lack of belief in the offensive line and what an offensive line is supposed to look like for a winning team organization to actually be able to pound the rock, pound the ball, and run the ball effectively enough to make it where Tua doesn't have to throw the ball 40 times. And it's so interesting because if they could effectively run the ball north of 100 yards and be, good at it. You don't have to be great at it. Last year you were, for the most part. Numbers a little skewed last year, but overall you had a very good running game, and lo and behold, your offense was explosive because it drew in the defense. It got you more single coverage with Tyreek. If you play the Dolphins tomorrow, when we're playing the 49ers, and you're defending them, who respects the run game? Why wouldn't you drop everybody back? Hence, a reason why last week the Texans had 3 picks, because they're drawing you in and they know you cannot run the ball. Now, probably the biggest reason I didn't pick the Dolphins to win last week is because the O-line, Austin Jackson's been out, and the run game has been completely different without him. And I don't even think he's this crazy X factor, but the reality is that he is at right tackle. And then you have Armstead out. So you have your 2 bookend tackles, and your backup right tackle, Kendall Lamb, was out. Good luck. You're not going to win that battle. You're just not going to win the battle. And then you throw in a piss-poor Liam Eichenberg, who he can go for another wasted draft pick, a guy who was the most NFL ready coming out of Notre Dame, and he's been a complete waste and disappointment. And I can't wait for them to not sign him. Just a completely wasted draft pick. The only guy on this line, the way it was constructed last week, that can actually play is Aaron Brewer at center, which I was actually kind of surprised because he's a little lighter, but he's played very, very well. He's been your solid, offensive line anchor. So hopefully you have that piece in the old toolbox moving forward. But the bottom line is the line isn't good enough in the trenches. It's not physical enough. It wasn't built to be. Therefore, the run game isn't good enough with, basically 4 of the same type of running back, which is another reason you should have kept Chris Brooks or got Derrick Henry or someone of that ilk. And then that leads you to Tua having to throw it 40 times, which leads you to 3 picks. Maybe if he throws it 32 times and you could run it that extra 8 and be more effective, maybe he throws 1 pick and not 3, and maybe you actually win the game. And this is the trickle down of why the Miami Dolphins right now sit at 6-8 in this stuck in the middle scenario that is beyond frustrating. But the reality is it's so blatantly obvious. It's blatantly obvious what will happen in these games. That's why last week I wasn't drinking Kool-Aid off of, oh, hey, you won a game against the Jets in overtime and Tua had a great drive at the end. Yeah, you did it. A game you should have lost that the Jets handed you. And then Tua had a good last drive against a piss poor defense where you basically threw 2 screenplays to Jonnu Smith and he did the rest. And then you threw a touchdown pass to him. And I'm sorry. And this is where it goes back to, do you pay guys too early? Do you not? In hindsight, and again, this isn't saying Tua is not a good quarterback. In hindsight, if you didn't lock him up last year and he played on the 5th-year option, this year, off of a concussion and off of poor play in big spots, where was he going? What was his value? Could you imagine if you were going to sign him now and nobody was going to jump and you saved yourself $15 million, $10 million, $20 million a year? That could be another handful of really good players on a team that needs it for a quarterback that needs it. But instead, we jumped the gun. And it's funny, all these teams that pay these guys early, you can look at the standings. They're all not in the playoffs. Not to say to not pay guys, but you didn't have to do it then. You didn't have to extend Tyreek. And that's why in all of this, which makes this even worse, is this will turn into, barring them collapsing the next 3 games, which I frankly don't even think that would matter, you're running it back. Because you push the credit card, you have this system in place, you have the QB with the coach, with the players, with the GM. The only guys I think that are going to pay for this year is going to be position coaches like Danny Crossman. Frankly, if that guy's actually on the field the last game, it's a travesty. The guy should have been fired 2 years ago. The most terrible special teams coach in the league by far. And he's your assistant head coach. So you're going to have some position coaches that probably take the axe for this. But other than that, I don't see anything changing. And I don't even know if I see it if we end up at a 6 and whatever that would be. 6 and 11 scenario if they lost out. And I've kind of said along, they're going to be 8-9. They're going to find a way to win 2 of these 3 against, subpar opponents, because that's what they do, to try and save some jobs. But it makes it worse because it's like, is there any hope? Like, let's be real. Last year, you won 11 games. You didn't win the division, you blew it, which is one of the biggest travesties in Dolphin history. And you ran it back and pushed credit cards and paid more people. And you're going to have to do it again with less money and less drafted talent to actually fill the holes that you have built into this roster. It's almost a scenario like, I don't want to say where do you go from here, because it's kind of like it's obvious where they will go from here. It's all these guys are under contract. We're going to have some draft picks. We're going to try and fill some holes. We're going to try and develop some guys. Yeah, we're going to get some free agents. But the reality is you're not breaking the bank for anybody. So, and I don't trust Chris Greer to go bargain shopping and find me solid, offensive linemen or defensive linemen or, secondary or whatever. Because the reality is you're going to have a lot of holes in both lines, in the secondary. To me, it's a mess. It's a complete and utter mess. And they're just too good to be bad and too bad to be good. And that's the worst place that you want to be, because you did feel like the first year of McDaniel, last year, up until that Titan game, you felt like you were building something. And now you've completely regressed. And you're only kind of winning some of these games because you're playing bad teams and because you do have enough talent in certain spots to do certain things. But make no mistake about it. In a game plan against this team, it is so blatantly obvious what to do to beat them. Blatantly obvious. Like a toddler, one of my children, could sit here and figure out how to beat this team. And then that brings us to now the 3 upcoming games: San Francisco, at Cleveland, which they flexed out of the Sunday night. Thank God they made it 4:00. Last thing we need is another night game to watch 2 bad teams. And then at the Jets, to be determined, probably will be that Sunday at 1 after New Year's. And I'm actually kind of on the fence as to what I think is going to happen. I lean towards the 8-9, used to be 8-8 when we had 16 games for life Dolphin scenario that we've had for so many years, where you basically lived between 7-9 and 9-7. So a bad year, a mediocre year, and a quote unquote good Dolphin year. You've lived in that world. You feel like we're still living in that world. You look at these matchups and you say, they're going to find a way to win 2 out of 3. They're going to win 2 crazy, ugly games where you're going to walk away from the game, pissed that you won a 23-20 game where you basically did the same mistakes, had the same issues that you had in all these other games. Can't run it, can't block, poor special teams. Tua plays a bad game. Like all the things that have plagued you. And you're going to walk out of this season at 8-9, and you're going to say, what's Greer going to say? He's going to say, well, we lost our quarterback for 4 games. Well, I'm sorry. You fucked that one up by not getting a solid backup. And by the way, the rumors out there is that Kirk Cousins is going to get released. Now, somebody, I don't know, I'd have to go through the teams in my head. Somebody might, quote unquote, give him a starting job, but I would go all in on making him my backup. Whatever. If it costs me $10 million, maybe you can even get him on the cheap because the guy's gotten the most guaranteed money in NFL history. Probably doesn't need $1. I would be on the horn with him tomorrow and I'd give him a 2-year deal. And if Tua went down, I could live with Kirk Cousins. I know he struggled here, mightily the last few games, but I'm sorry. I'll take him as my backup. So it's another story for another day as we get into the offseason, but you almost feel like, is anybody other than coordinators going to pay for this mess? And I just don't see it. I don't see it. Even if they go 6-11, is Greer going to get fired? Because here's the thing. The only way you make moves for the future from the organizational perspective, and this is where they've screwed up for years, is GM, president, whatever you want to call them, and coach need to come in together, need to be in lockstep together, and ultimately the power player needs to be the GM. Meaning, I'm looking for that guy number 1, and then that guy finds the coach. So if you fired Greer and you said, hey, it's his fault, McDaniel's not going anywhere. He just got a 3-year deal. I'd be shocked if he went anywhere. So if Greer goes, 1, you're not going to get a GM who's a top-notch guy, dictator-type GM, who's going to say, hey, let me take the Dolphin job, and I'm going to be handed Mike McDaniel. And then Mike McDaniel would be a lame duck, albeit, he'd be in his, second year of his 3-year deal. Or I'm sorry, it would be because they extended it. So it would be, second year of a 4-year deal. Like, that marriage isn't going to work either, which then leads to Tua, who's obviously married with McDaniel. So that's why, to me, nothing's going to happen. They're going to go in. They're both under contract. They're going to be on the hot seat next year. They're going to have to make it happen. And the reality is this. Will anything change? No. For this reason, and I think I said it a couple weeks ago. I don't see either one of those dudes walking into a room and saying, you know what? The mentality of the team has to change. I just don't see that. Will they maybe say we got to tweak some stuff? Sure. But they're so drunk on this speed. It don't work when it's 20 degrees. It don't work when it's snowing. It don't work in the rain. It don't work. And I just don't know who's the one in the organization with the balls to say, fundamentally, are the type of football player we look for, the type of mentality. Now, again, you're not going to rewrite the offense, but Mike McDaniel, and I think he knows he has to run the ball. I think in this year, I've said it before, in fairness, I think at this point, I don't think he can run the ball. They're running at like a 2.9 average per carry, which is just laughable. I think he probably wants to run it more, but now he's at the mercy of a bad O-line that was constructed to begin with and a lot of injuries on the O-line. So that's a huge problem. So as you sit here, are they going to sit here and say, all right, we dodged the bullet, we got a mulligan for this year. You know, Ross, he's paid guys, he's paid us, the whole thing. We're not going to upset that apple cart. But are we going to fundamentally change who we are and reinvent ourselves? I would be shocked, floored, and amazed if that actually happened, because I think they're just so drunk on speed. Maybe I'm wrong. But that, to me, is the only shot that this team has to come back next year better, stronger, and actually play a brand of winning football. Because if they think this is a brand of winning football, they're flat out drunk. This is reactionary football, is what it is. It's undisciplined. It's flashy at times, gives you a little hope, but ultimately it would be a hell of a lot worse too if they actually had a hard schedule. Their schedule has been, this team, if you would have played the brand of football we probably all thought they would have or could have, this would have been a 12-win team with that schedule. Like, easy 12 wins. You'd have been 12-5. Maybe you could have even pushed 13-4. Minimum 11-6. But you've had, bad luck, which honestly, I shouldn't say bad luck. Bad luck that you created by poor roster construction and management and depth. And then poor game day coaching and a lack of fundamental discipline. Like nothing's more frustrating as a fan when it's one thing in the NFL when the QB, the trenches, the skill positions, the wide out, the running back, the tight end, when that guy lines up against another guy and they're just so much more physically gifted and talented, and then they have a team in the multiple spots where even if on your best day you play the best game you can't keep up with it just because the talent will overwhelm you. Even if the talent makes mistakes in the beginning and penalties and turnovers, ultimately those teams in those games typically turn into, you're going to, even on a good day for them, they're going to hang with you, but then you're going to pull away. That was not the case with the way this was all constructed. You have the talent in most spots, not all. But then even with that, the shortcomings you had, you don't even play fairly decently enough fundamentally to actually have won some of these games. And that, to me, is the ultimate sign of a lot of your issues from a coaching perspective. Does the coaching staff and Mike McDaniel believe in the small things? The guy constantly blows timeouts. The guy he cannot win challenges. He runs the offense as if everything is like life or death. Like, slow the fuck down, bro. Slow down. But then in the moments where he does need to speed up in 2-minute drills before the end of the half and things like that, that's when they kind of slow down. It's very weird and it's very confusing. So it's going to be really, really interesting as a Dolphin fan going down this stretch of these 3 games in this just depressing season. Like, just talk about a popcorn fart is the way this season has went for the expectations that you had. We don't call it the Dolphins Make Me Cry podcast for nothing as we prepare for the last home game of the season at Hard Rock Stadium. So this is Steve Gio's Week 16 Miami Dolphin pick in the league where they play for pay. Dolphins 49ers 425 game. The 49ers favored by 1.5. They've had plenty of their own troubles off of being in the Super Bowl last year. They've had a multitude of injuries. They've played very inconsistently. It's a very tricky game for me. Over-unders 44.5. On one hand, I want to think the Dolphins are going to come out. They're going to kind of do enough. They're going to be at home off of the bad performance last week against a team that, they're, kind of subpar to the issues they have in injuries. But I think we're going to walk out of that game, and I think the 49ers are going to win a 27-20 game. And I think the lynch mob is going to be out at Hard Rock Stadium, and I'm going to be the one carrying the pitch torch to fire Greer, because I think it'll be another embarrassing loss to a team that's not that good. And it'll be a performance that'll be lack of run game, Tua with mistakes, poor special teams, poor defensive play, just overall Dolphin consistent inconsistencies. And I think we're going to walk out of there pissed off. Now, I'd really like to be wrong, and I'd love us to come out here and just at least say you can win these last 3 games. Because playoff scenario, you are technically still alive. If you won out, the Chargers lost 2, the Colts lose 1, and I'm sure the stars in the sky, Santa has to come down the chimney. I'm sure there's 17 other things that have to happen, but that would be the way the Dolphins would make the playoffs. Wouldn't that be some shit? So that being said, let's go Fins. Last home game, make it a good one. Stop being pathetic, and we will see you next week.